by you telling us a little bit about your background, how you came to Montgomery, how you came here, and why you came here.
I was a school teacher, and they were very impoverished at that time. About the longest school term we had in those years was 5 and 6 months. And of course, the Great Depression came on, and everybody had to do what they could do because nobody had any jobs, any money, anything else. You had a farm. It was a liability just about it.
Where was this?
Connecticut. And I came up when Governor Miller ran for office. Our little town had 90 votes. Actually, we had 91. Governor Miller got 90. One voted against him. And we were always proud. I guess Governor Miller went in office with the fewest votes of any governor that's ever gotten in. In fact, we didn't have voters much in those days. I mean, wasn't many people voted. People weren't entered. I reckon they never paid the poll tax. And of course, since those years, they've done away with that cumulative poll tax thing, and a lot of people registered and never had to pay that poll tax. But anyway, we had one person didn't vote for me, and Governor Miller gave me a job on the strength of my making an application to him and presenting my story to him. And he always told it during the 4 years that he was in there that she got all the votes in that county for me but one, and she killed him. He died right after that, reason he said, which was the truth. I mean, I didn't kill him, but I mean, he was dead.
Now, what was his full name, the governor? Because that, to us, you know, that's ancient history. So
I know it's ancient. What was his name?
Yeah, Governor Benjamin.
Benjamin Miller.
And well, he was from.
He was from Wilcox County. Governor Miller had been in the Supreme Court of Alabama, and he ran for re-election and was defeated. And he served 6-year term, and then right after that, he was defeated in 1927. And then he ran for governor and was elected. And that was a very heated debate, and that he served between the two Graves administrations.
Well, now, I have heard he was a rather pious man. Is that correct?
Oh, he was a wonderful man. You can't beat Governor Miller. He was highly religious, and he was fiscal minded. You don't spend more of the state's money than you take in. And he got that budget, Fletcher Budget and Control Act passed, which made that, it's a constitutional amendment. I think they finally got it through. So they have to live within the means since he passed that. And another thing he put in, when Governor Miller was there, he put in the income tax. He campaigned this state in his personal car, which was an old 1926 Dodge. He went from one end of the state to the other.
He lived in Camden before he came here?
Camden. And while he was here, they lived at the old governor's mansion where the interstate crosses over here on Perry Street. You know, they tore it down, the interstate went right through the lot. And he was living there, and his wife died while he was still in office, I think the last year of his administration.
What was the capital, what was the governor's offices like during his term?
Well, the governor's office proper was always kept very nice, but the recording secretary's office, they call it, or the entrance out there, you know, where you come into, and that book you have shows that. Look, but it was horrible. In those days, and especially during Governor Graves' term, they had what they called the 90-day, some kind of thing where you could get out of prison after serving 90 days. And the lawyers just waxed fat on it, coming back and forth, and they'd bring all these women that would come to get their husbands out of prison, would sit on all those old seats around there, and they'd bring all the children they could borrow to get up sympathy for for their case. And the old desk was an oval desk in there, and it had this veneer on it that was coming off, and you stick yourself with it if the image is terrible. And over at one side, there was a little recess in the wall and had a little water speaker coming out of that. And it stayed like that until when and I'm getting ahead, my next governor would be Governor Dixon anyway, but Miss Dixon did a whole lot towards refinishing the interior, painting it, and putting up new drapes and things, and it was very pretty. But the outer office was horrible.
How about the hallways and that kind of thing? Were they kept clean and nice?
Oh, we had, don't ever think that Capitol wasn't the most beautiful spot on earth. I came up from the country, and I'm ahead of my story a little bit. When Governor Miller came in office, there was no money, no nothing. And there were more people on the payroll, so that one of the first things he did when he took office was to bring state government down to the constitutional level. And that just dropped people off of departments and everything. And it took him from then until up in the spring to get things lined up so he could know what he could do. So he was elected in January, and I was not one of the first people he appointed, but I was among the first. And it was the 1st of April before I went to work. And we got one paycheck, which I started off at $100 a month. And I want to tell you, I had never seen that much money before, and I never had made that much since.
What a long way.
Oh, it took care of the whole family, and everybody else did too. Just about one person in every family worked.
Well, where did you live when you first came to Montgomery?
Well, I lived over at a place on Court Street. I was married at that time, but my husband has been dead 35 years. But anyway, after the first month, Governor Miller had to go to New York and borrow money to operate the state on. Because when the money comes in the fall, you know, it's the last year of an administration, as a rule, it's allocated. So much the incoming governor, which will be the outgoing governor, will leave the incoming governor about 3/4 of that amount, because he goes from October the 1st until January, which is a little bit better than 3 months, because it goes to the middle of January. And there was nothing left. So we went into the 3rd month by payment of scrip. I wonder what a state employee do today if they had to face that.
What about the janitorial service? Did you tell me?
I was going to say it there. I left that out. I'm just getting at that. We had a man named Howard Thames who was the custodian of the building. I guess was his title. Anyway, at that time we used convict labor. Kilby Prison was, of course, open out. It hadn't been not open since it went down. It hadn't been too long ago. But those convicts would come in and clean the Capitol. He'd go out there and get them at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he would scrub those floors, those marble halls, and wax them and polish them. And all the brass work, you know, coming up the steps and everything, the hand railing, he'd have those just putting your eyes out. And the Capitol was perfectly beautiful and clean. And by the time Governor Miller would come in this morning, this is my first year there, so I can describe that perfectly. My office was right above the governor's office in the Revenue Department. The Governor Miller would come up those north steps. Well, they'd be sitting out there, you know, they had on, after they got through cleaning the building, they put on their new uniform for the day, which trustees wore white uniforms that were made out at the prison. So they'd be standing out there on the steps singing these spirituals. And one I remember so beautiful was the, what is that thing? There comes coming across Jordan to carry me home. That's what they sing out there so big. And that was the prettiest music I ever want to hear, coming up from those things. And the treetops were just beautiful and green, and they were filled with birds, you know, singing out there, and it was just a beautiful sight.
Didn't have any parking problems in those days.
Oh, and well, I'm going to tell you about the parking place when I get to Graves. You used to go around there and turn around and come out. And if you got wedged in there, you couldn't hardly get out. That's one of the things Governor Gordon Parsons did.
Back in Governor Miller's time, did they have the state office employees located in some of those old houses below the...
All of those offices were in it. Just many of those offices. The Public Service Commission was right there on the corner.
In an old house?
Yeah, and the Education Department was down in an old house. And at over there on the street where the Memorial Building is standing, there's a bunch of old houses over there that housed a lot of them. Speaking about the parking places, you didn't need them under Governor Miller. Nobody had a car. Everybody walked to work. There wasn't but a half dozen cars parked around there.
How about the streetcar? Did people use the streetcar?
Yeah, they came up, put you out right at the steps, and you walked up those little dinky steps.
There were houses all around in back of the Capitol too, and on to the north and south. Residential, was it residential?
Yeah, had a lot of residential houses back there. The basement of the Capitol, now, I think it was during Governor Patterson's administration that we did some work in that. Albert Brewer, at the end of his administration, we took the books out and moved them to other places. It used to be just rows and rows and rows of books stacked up there. And of course there wasn't any way to keep them clean, and the rats were eating on them all the time, and nobody ever went in that basement much.
There was no cafeteria or anything in those days.
Oh, and the other directed, Howard Thames had a cafeteria out there where the elevator is. Just served little sandwiches and coffee and things at that time.
Was that on the opposite side of the hall?
On the opposite side of the hall. They later made up the men's restroom, I think,
right.
The same spot.
Do you remember the archives and history being in the Capitol?
Yes, it was over there. I never did go over there much, but since when they built the building, I don't think I went over there about once or twice for the building. It was in that little a part of the archive. Now that was Game and Fish Department, just be right over the Revenue Department. And they later took that into archives. They had that fish, those birds, those native birds and things, but I think they over in the archives now. But they used to be up there on the second floor right next to it.
Do you remember the first time you ever saw the Alabama legislature convene right after you came to Montgomery? What was your impression?
Well, you see, in those days we had 4-year terms. I mean, once every 4 years. I don't mean 4 years. I don't think he lived through 4 years. But anyway, it came in session. But then it recessed during the summer and had the committee meetings that last practically a year. And it was a rare thing we ever had a special session there.
How do they transact the state's business once every 4 years? That's...
I don't know, but what they didn't do a whole lot. Maybe you can do a whole lot when you have shorter time. That seems to be what Guy Hunt's thinking. He's just giving them how many days to get the budget through.
What were the legislative chambers like in those days? Do you recall them and what they looked like?
Yes, I worked up there. After I worked for Governor Miller 4 years, I worked in the legislature, and it was in session practically in about the entire time. And it was, well, it was just bad like it is now so far. They haven't changed anything about this. They put up the sanding boards, that stuff to make it soundproof. It wasn't boards, but whatever it was.
It was just plaster walls.
Uh-huh.
Electric fans, I
Yeah.
imagine.
And in those days, I worked, as I said, I worked for the legislature. I made $125. I never had made that much money before. But anyway, the members of the legislature made the same thing, $4 a day, 7 days a week. And we had about, I think we had about 2 or 3 pages, and they were elected by the entire membership of the legislature. And I think they made something like $3.
Was Miss Mitty Miller there when you came?
Oh, Mitty? You know, Mitty was a character within herself. Many years ago, she used to work for the telephone company. And during that time, she learned all the workings of the Capitol and the legislature, looking for those different people up there. Then she was given a job at the Capitol as a guide. And she still did the same work, but was on the state payroll. Now, she was one of the first people I saw when I came to Montgomery. And as you know, she had her little hat that she enjoyed wearing, which I don't think I ever saw without. And I think it was the same hat. I'm not quite sure, but it didn't change, I don't think. Now, one of the days, one of the stories I remember of Mitty was she used to come up to the legislature and deliver messages to these different senators. And we had this senator who was one of the few millionaires in those days in the legislature from up in Madison County. And she had a call for him, and she stepped in the Senate chamber and she says, "Shelby, telephone." Shelby says, "If it's a lady, I won't talk. I won't talk." She said, "Well, if she's a lady, what's she doing calling you?"
She could get away with those kinds of things.
Oh, yes, and nobody else would have dared call Shelby Fletcher's hand.
You were telling about her brother.
Well, later, he got a job, too, as assistant guide. I reckon he was Mitty's assistant. And they worked up there together for a long time.
Did Miss Mitty serve in the governor's office while you were in office?
Yeah. Well, I think she died before that time. She was in the governor. Well, all the time I was in the governor's office, she was in and out, not exactly attached to that office. She was from the legislature in the governor's office and wherever else she took a notion to work. Principally out there in the lobby.
How did she get a job like that?
Well, she got hers by experience. As I said, she'd worked for the telephone company, and she knew all these people, and she knew pretty well their habits. She didn't tell them, but she knew them. And when they'd call up there, like from, well, we'll just say from Huntsville, they'd call down and want to speak to somebody, she'd know exactly where to go put her hand on them. And she'd have them in the telephone in 5 or 10 minutes. Governor Dixon came, you know, he ran the second time before he was elected. And I don't know whether you all remember the campaign. What was that? No tax, no taxes, or no tax tokens, no token taxes. He ran on the platform of doing away with the sales tax token, which were a nuisance, and with streamlining state government and bringing everything from the county up at the state level. That was where his platform. And his platform was written from when Governor Miller was in office. He couldn't find out what the state owed, so he had the Brookings Institute to make a survey of state government. And they sat in the basement. That's one time we used the basement. And I was one of the secretaries, and Annie Rand was the other that sat there and worked with him during all that time. He wrote those, I believe it's, how many is 5 or 7 volumes, I forgot. I got a copy of it in there. So Frank Dixon wrote his platform from the recommendations of the Brookings Institute, and they defeated him on that local option feature. They wanted to take the power away from the probate judges and bring it to state level. So the next time around, when Frank Dixon got together with the county and they all worked out their problems, and he was elected, and he streamlined state government. I mean to tell you, he took all of those little finance departments, want to do this and want to do that, and put them all together, named it Director of Finance, head of it, and it has deteriorated or eroded very little since the time he set it up.
Were all the offices in the Capitol and government?
Oh no, that's when they brought them in from all out there. They couldn't get them in the Capitol, but they run. You know, the Revenue Department used to take up, it used to be in the Capitol. How you reckon they did that? I'm wondering now when they take up all creation. When I worked for the Revenue Department, I think there were 45 employees. And that took in the counties where they have the, you know, the Tax Assessing Board, Board of Equalization, and the boards of registrars and the jury commissions, and all of those. Frank Dixon came in, you know, he was the one who'd had his leg amputated from World War. He got injured in World War I. He was a very learned man. As I say, he came from preachers and teachers and everything. And he was not a man that, he liked to deal in big things, streamlining that government and putting over the things he wanted to do, and such a thing. And now, like we take George Wallace, he'll see the least little fellow that comes in there and listen to every word he's got to say. But Frank Dixon had lieutenants to do that, and he expected them to do it. And for that reason, he might not have been considered as friendly a man. He just was tops in every respect, though. Now I can tell you that. We never had a finer governor than Frank Dixon. Never a governor has done more for the state of Alabama than Frank Dixon.
He was in one term, just one term.
One term. And he never ran again, did he? He was in that states' rights thing, and everybody.
I was the expert in this.
Well, weren't he and Miss Marie Bankhead Owen were very good friends, as I understand it, wasn't that?
Yeah, well, he would like all of those volumes and things she had over there, and of course he was like the Bankheads, and he was real. He was liked by. I'm just talking about down on the. He was liked by everybody, but he didn't just have a deluge of people in his office all the time. He just didn't. And he tended to the things that needed tending to. Now I'll tell you that.
Did you mentioned the Bankheads, and they were kind of in their heyday, I would imagine, back in those days. Do you remember the Bankhead Dynasty? Of course, Miss Marie, and then her brother, and then her father. Do you remember any of those people?
Oh yeah, Miss Marie was quite a fixture around there. And of course the senators, they didn't come to, congressmen and senators didn't come to the state a whole lot in those days. I reckon transportation was all right when you didn't have any planes, you had to come by train or whatever.
So they didn't come around to the Capitol that much?
No.
Okay, let's go on to Governor Sparks now.
Now, Governor Sparks had been in the legislature for years. He was a confirmed old bachelor. And he was, like some others, he was against everything that come up. And then, one day the thing turned. He had an opportunity to be elected governor, and he saw it from a different angle. And he was elected governor at the time, I believe, when Governor Graves would have been elected the third time, so to speak. So he came in kind of always feeling like that he wanted to be elected by the people, but he was a good governor. But during his term, was World War II, and there wasn't any materials much with which to work or anything. So he came in on the Farm to Market Road. He did a lot towards that. But his main thing that he established the Medical College of Alabama. That was one of the great things he did. and they have named a building up there for him. He never got the recognition that he was entitled to. And this man who is up there now is Dr. Gary Miles, and he comes from the state of Kansas. And he's done a terrific job up there with that medical college. He's got underprivileged children and everything.
It all started under Governor Sparks.
And they've named that building up there for me, and they named it the Sparks Center.
You were telling us a funny story, I believe, one time on the phone about Governor Sparks getting him to sign papers was a difficult thing.
Yeah, when he came in, I was going to back up to that. When he came in office, as I said, he had worked for a little bank down in Eufaula. I don't know whether he worked in the bank, but he was one of the directors or something, and his signature was the most important thing he owned, and he was just and he was a lawyer in addition to that. He didn't believe in signing anything, so every voucher that paid by the state of Alabama from any department has to first, before it meets payment, come by the governor's office to be approved. Well, he just stuck his heels in the dirt, and he wasn't going to sign. They stacked up. Every table was filled. You could hardly see your way out. All the pieces of furniture were covered. And Hayes Tucker was his finance director. And he kept telling him that they were losing interest by letting these things lapse and everything, you know. So finally, within a week, they convinced him they had to be signed because you could barely get in the office. Well, when we got the green light, it took us about 2 or 3 days to sign those and get them out. Then the real problem arose. There were the school deeds. All this school land had to be approved. Nobody dared take that in there. So one day, this cute little plump lady came in. She wanted to see Governor Sparks. She had not seen him since their courting days. So she went in his office, you know, and oh, he was so glad to see her, and he sat up there, you know, just showing off how the workings of the governor's office went. So Mr. Jones got his little deeds, and in he walked and put them before him, and he signed every one of them. Never did know he'd signed them. I love that. Speaking of convicts, I'll tell another cute story right here. One morning, I had some important papers. I had to see the governor the first thing. Somebody called me to do something, and I said,
What governor was it?
Well, do you remember which governor it was?
"This is Governor Sparks, important paper." That I had to see him. Somebody had called me to get me to handle something or to tell the governor this, that, and everything. I said to the porter, I said, "Has the governor come in?" "Yeah, I just watered him." Don't you love that one?
Sprayed him with a hose.
Brought him some water, hung up his hat, and it didn't tickle me so. Now then,
Oh, yeah. Do you remember the redecoration of the office during the time of Governor Sparks?
yeah, that was, I was going to tell why that happened. Governor Sparks went to a governor's conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
And he was impressed by what he saw there, and he wanted to redecorate? Is that
Yeah, and when he got back, the Capitol there was so ornate and beautiful, and when he came back, and he said, he called Mr. Jones in, and he said, "George," said, "I want you to call the building commission together and do something for the offices out there." Says, "My office looks nice." And Ms. Dixon had redone that to a degree. And he says, "I want these offices redecorated." So they called for bids, and nobody in Alabama would bid on it. And the W.E. Brand Decorating Company bid, and they sent there Mr. Ralph J. King over here.
Where were they from? W. Brown Decorating Company?
W.E. Brand Decorating Company in Atlanta, Georgia. And they sent there Mr. Ralph King, I believe was his name. King was his name, I believe it was right. And he planned all of those decorations, and it was perfect. Now, you've got that magazine that is shown, and I lost mine. I can't find it. And that desk in there was my desk that was created for me at that time.
That's interesting. That, did you know about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also have a nice little stand at Secretary of State's office.
That's I told you I was going to give it to you. It's hanging out there in that.
We'll put that over in the Secretary of State's office. I think it matches enough these.
Yeah, it was one of those original old hat racks, and you know it had these prongs. The only thing, there was 3 prongs up the top of which hats on. One of them's missing. One of those little arms, and that's the only thing that's missing. I kept thinking I'd find one, and I didn't. But I wanted it to hang plants on, and at the bottom it's got a place where you put your umbrella, and it drips down in this little pan, catches the water.
Up until that time, the office was still that kind of mess that it had been for 20 or 25 years, I guess, huh?
It certainly was the biggest mess you ever saw, and it was so perfectly beautiful. If you look from that magazine, nothing was ever prettier.
How long did it take them to complete it, the renovation?
Well, we were tied up during a legislative session. It looked to me like forever. I thought they never would get through. It took several months because they redid all that little things up there, those little medallions up in the ceiling. They did every one of those, you know, and they put it that sunshine yellow. It was a beautiful color when they first painted it. And those drapes that are hanging out there are made of the same material as is in the governor's palace in Williamsburg by Scalamandra, I think was the one that, and I don't know what's hanging there now. I haven't been up there.
They are the same drapes, I believe. Were they deep green, dark green velvet?
No, these were gold.
Well, maybe it's not the same drapes.
Out there, the ones in the governor's office was the ones like the one in mine. There was green velvet out there. You're right about that. I'm getting ahead of my story. These hung in the governor's office, right back on his desk, was the same material as that in the governor's. And I have been to Williamsburg since then, and I made it my business to go in and see. And sure enough, it was. I wonder if it's still there.
I don't really know whether they're original or not.
And another thing I wanted to bring out at that time, that little office, now we didn't give Jim Folsom credit for that. That was one of the good things. We haven't gotten to him though yet. He cut that door from the governor's office through that little place where the secretary sits. That was a porter's office. They hung all the old dirty uniforms and everything in there when the other governors were there. And so Jim Folsom got tired of everybody having to go through the executive secretary's office, so he cut that door. And I'm going to tell you, that was a major job. It was that thick. And all the dust and dirt that came out of that just ruined everything in that office for days till they got through chiseling it out. So that's just what you're going through with, I imagine, down at the Supreme Court.
Did they install air conditioning in the governor's office in the 40s back in Sparks' time?
Honey, when I went to work for the governor's, when I went to work in the Capitol, let me put it like that, it was the coolest place in town because the breezes blew through. One by one, they'd cut off a little office and air conditioning. Gordon Parsons put the first air conditioning in the governor's office. He got 2 big units and put it there. And then we didn't have an air conditioner. Then later somebody came along after that, it might have been during his same administration, that they kind of put in that central thing. They did it by piecemeal. There was hardly any way you could close that Capitol off though. Out there in the hall, you know, the breezes would blow up that hill. There wasn't any place in town as cool. Jim Folsom was a likable person. He loved people, and his physique carried him places that probably he couldn't have gone otherwise. I mean, he just stood head and ears above anybody. But I shall never forget when he came in office. His first order of business when he was elected was to send somebody to Atlanta, Georgia, instead of the setup of Ellis Arnold. And he copied Ellis Arnold's, you know, the way he handled his administration. Oh, they came back with the biggest ideas you ever saw of filling all these offices, you know, with different people and different things. They came out there and put in new chairs and new desks, and they told me they weren't going to keep me. That they, as soon as I taught my successor there, my job, they were going to they'd give me a job somewhere, but it wouldn't be in the governor's office. So that's the condition. I told him, I said, well, I'll take it under one consideration. That is that I retain my title. I knew if they ever took the title away from me, I'd never get it back. And they draw the money, because I do the work, they draw the money. So they didn't answer me, but they never take it away from me. Well, you know, it rained the week he was inaugurated. It rained just weeks beforehand. And lo and behold, everybody wondered how in the world they'd ever get to have the inauguration. And lo and behold, the day of the inauguration, the sun came out in all of its glory. And I shall never forget, I was standing on that little vestibule out there on the front. You know, I never seen that many people anywhere in the world. They came from every nook and corner of this day. And old General Saliba was adjutant general. So when we went in there that afternoon to go into the governor's office, he stood at the door, and he would let so many in, and then he'd slam the door. And that went on all day. Halt! In would come, slam and go the door. And we had just put in new carpet. The next day it had to be replaced. That many people came, you just never saw nothing equal. And one of the things when they came in, I should never forget this either, he brought in this big placard and hung it over his desk. And there we were just sitting there wondering what was going to happen to us. He says, we make no small plans. Oh, he was operating beautifully. Jim Folsom was a good governor, though. Everything that he ever stood for, the ones that came after have followed in his footsteps. They recommend the same thing. He went in on a $50 a month pension for the old folks, $1,800 a year for the school teachers. And he could never get those things, but one of was his last administration, he got to the $50 a month for the old folks, and it would not be paid until January. So he devised the plan of a little green slip of paper, and it had a little holly wreath, and he mailed it to each one of those recipients for Christmas. It says, a Christmas gift for you. And on it, it said something like, on such and such a date, you'll receive an increase of so much in your pension. And you know they've done it since.
You remember when he replaced the steps out front?
Oh, yeah, that was the greatest thing he ever did, was replacing those. I mean, it did more for the building, for the feeling of everything. Because as I said to you, everybody's going to get old. And to walk up those little old dinky steps, and they were scooped out, you know, they'd been walked on so much, they were scooped out in the center. And you'd go trudging up those little old steps. And well, lo and behold, he came up with that. And that's the best thing he ever did, I think. In addition to cutting that door in that porter's office and making that an office, that expanded the governor's office, gave us more room. But Gordon Parsons was... he was a businessman. I mean, he had business administration. And he was down, of course, on the Public Service Commission. And he was interested in television. He set up the Alabama Television Commission. And another thing he was interested in was REA. And he did a lot for that. He was connected strongly with REA, not only in Montgomery, but in all over the state. And he was...
REA stands for what now?
As a Rural Electrification Authority, put lights in all these little towns. They set up a board during some of these federal things, I reckon the Roosevelt administration, and he was on that, he was named head of that for Alabama. And they abolished that during the Dixon administration, so he was in the meantime down at the Public Service Commission, and of course he was very instrumental in it then. And then he ran, of course, all the REA. Now that's a lot of votes if you want to take it in. That helped get him elected. And Gordon Persons was known as a gadget man. You know, he fooled with all these things, and he campaigned in a helicopter. And he'd go to these schools, you know, and he'd drop down on the lawn, and all these children would just have fits over him, and he'd hand down his cards to them and say, take this home to your mama. He got a many a vote like that.
Did he use television to campaign?
Well, no, they didn't use it. It wasn't so prevalent then, was it? He might have used it some, but I can't remember that he did. But he got a nice vote.
Do you remember what was his personality like, and his dress and demeanor and that kind of thing?
Gordon Persons was one of the best dressed governors we've ever had. But he had some, he didn't like crowds, smoke and things bothered him. He had a heart attack not long before the end of his administration, and he was not even able to ride in the, you know, the outgoing governor rides up to the Capitol with the incoming governor. And what I was going to say about the way he dressed, he was just as well dressed as any man, well groomed anytime you ever saw him. And he liked sporty cars and things of that type. Oh, he was loved by this Montgomery group. I mean, he'd been here always. Worked in filling stations as a little boy and things like that, you know. He'd served all the people.
He lived in the new governor's mansion or the other?
Well, at the old governor's mansion, in fact, Jim Folsom was living in the old governor's mansion, and he was going to buy this new thing where they're living now. I call it new. And Gordon Persons objected to it at that time, but later he bought it and refinished it and everything, and he lived in it, and Jim Folsom got to live in it the next time. But anyway, he knew more about the workings of state government, I imagine, than most any governor that's ever gone in there, because he was right across the street over there in the Attorney General's office, and so many things that go through the governor's office have to be approved by the Attorney General. He is the legal advisor for the governor in a way, for state matters as a whole. And so he came in and he had a very nice administration. I'm going to say this, the state employees felt close to John Patterson. They felt like they had a friend at court. And he had a good administration, a business-like administration.
And then I guess you were there for the first Wallace administration?
Yeah. Then I left when, I mean, it was during his term that I ran for Secretary of State.
So you didn't really work for George Wallace then, you became Secretary of State, is that right?
Oh, no, I worked for him for a year.
I see.
And Leline and I ran at the same time. When she ran for governor, I was running for Secretary of State. Oh, yeah, I was George Wallace's right-hand man.
Do you remember anything specific about his administration? Any incidents or anything particularly funny that may have happened?
What, but I tell you, actually, there weren't many cute things happened. George Wallace was in that thing up to his neck from the word go. I used to do I did all the appointments of the boards, bureaus, and what have you, you know, and I'd mark my records, I'd write up all the paperwork and mark my records accordingly and put it in there for him to sign. Well, he never did send back out to me the mail. If it didn't go out, he'd let me know. When I learned anything about it, he had not signed any of it. He just wouldn't make appointments because he was afraid. You know what it is to make an appointment. You make one person, maybe a half a dozen happy, and about 25 mad as fire. And so he was just slow to do that. And at one administration, I have forgotten how many appointments they said he'd let lay over. And they got in there and made them all right at the last. Because he just wouldn't, as he used to dictate this letter to me, that one of the worst things he had to deal with was making a choice between his friends. And that's the truth. That's just the way he felt. And when I came in with Governor Miller, and he was in between the two Bibb Graves administrations. And you see, I didn't work for Bibb Graves, I worked for the legislature at the time he was there. And then the next time I came into the governor's office with Governor Dixon.
Where did you work with the legislature? Where was your office when you were...
Where was your office? I worked for the Senate. And there was a little side thing there that they must have had 15 desks, just as close together as they could get. And you sat at that desk and typed out whatever you're supposed to do, and you typed these bills, and they sold for, you know, a good little bit to the public. And we never had to check them or anything, we just type them. I don't know how many errors. I don't know how anybody ever found out what page. And that's the way we worked, and they just jammed up.
Conditions were pretty rough.
I always think one of the cute things happened when I was working for the legislature. You know, this David Dunn, who's a doctor here, his daddy was a big politician, and he later was postmaster of this state, but he was a big Graves man. So one day this good-looking little brown-eyed boy came up, and his daddy had got him a job. He was whatever his name is, job Dunn. David Dunn's son, he was David Dunn Jr. is who he was. So he'd been in and got squared away with Mrs. Spate and got on the payroll and everything, and he'd come out just feeling so big. And we were out there checking bills. And he come up and talked to us. He said, "Who y'all kin to?" He got it on his daddy. What to do? We got our job. I'm going to tell him that if I ever see it.
The merit system created quite a revolution.
Oh, that was the greatest thing ever happened for Alabama.
We were one of the last states to get it, too.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the dress code for employees when you first started working, say, compared to Governor Miller's time to the time when you wound up with Governor Wallace? What happened to the dress code, the way people dressed when they came to work over all those years? Not much.
They wore what they, get 7 days in a row, just be right close together. Just find something to wear. Oh, they all dressed neatly and nicely. I don't mean that. But I mean, there wasn't any, of course, a lot of folks came just dressed together.
A lot of people dressed up then, or way back there, years ago.
Yeah.
Women wear hats and gloves.
Oh, no, nobody but Mitty Miller. She wore that hat. It was her, that was her uniform.
Was it the same hat every week?
Yes. I don't think it ever changed. Did you ever see Mitty?
I've seen pictures of her with that funny little hat on.
Yeah, that funny little hat was there.
Do you remember any presidents that have come to the Alabama Capitol?
Any president? Let me see, did we ever have a president? Oh, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Right. Tell us a little bit about when he came.
Oh, that was when I first came to the Capitol, and that was when Governor Miller was governor, and one of the great things they criticized him for he had just gone out to the mansion, and it was just Governor Miller and his wife, who was, had never been she had never been very healthy, and I think she'd been sick maybe a long time when they came up here. But anyway, she was a lovely lady, and she wasn't anything only entertaining. But anyway, the ladies of Montgomery got together and cleaned up the mansion, and they said they didn't have teacups enough to serve for the reception they were going to have for him. Well, anyway, they cleaned up Montgomery. Oh, I'd never seen a president before in my life, and he came on a special train, and he come pulling up into Union Station, and they had put this little string of lights all the way from the station up to the Capitol. And they built out on the main rotunda of the Capitol this platform for him to get into. I had never realized how crippled he was. And he walks up into that, and then they put the clinchers down to hold him, to keep him from falling. And he made his speech, and I was sitting as close as I am from me to you to him. And that was the greatest thrill I believe I ever had, was to see a president that close. Well, I'm drawing retirement on 46 years. But what I want to say to people, whenever you take a job, I started to work on a temporary basis, and it lasted that many years. I never had the protection of any merit system, because when we started to work, all you had to do if you could get a job and get your salary, that was all. There were no deducts from it in those days. We had no insurance, and we had no taxes, no nothing. So when I made $100 then, when I said it was the most money I'd ever seen, that was just a clean $100. Not like it is today. Well, I always think politics, people always say that's dirty politics. Well, now let me tell you something. There's politics in everything that you do. And to be a clean politician, politics to me is doing the most good for the most people. Is that the way you see it? That's right. But there are so many selfish politicians in it, and I think politics is an interesting field. I don't believe I would change and I just kind of accidentally got into it by taking a job with, I think I started off with the legislature. No, I tried to get with the legislature, but I finally wound up with the revenue department. And I worked hard during all the years that I worked. And if I'd say to young people that state government or national government is a good field if you get in the right place. For me personally, that's the most sacred spot I know, is right up there at that Capitol. You don't put the big days and nights in that. We used to sit there and never look at the clock, and it seemed like we just worked. One night I worked all night, like typing the ABC board bill. Do you know that when they put that in, they had to type the thing up to get it. They introduced a frame so it would get its first reading. In other words, it's just the very first type of the thing, and the bill was later added. So we had to type all night to get that ready to introduce the next morning when the legislature met. As many governors as I worked for, I would no more have violated anybody's confidence, any governor's confidence. And you didn't dare let anybody know who you was going to vote for. For governor, you couldn't afford to. I tell you that the job I held in the governor's office was a horrible place to be during the governor's race. I mean, really and truly, you just never thought of it from that angle. But anything you do, there's somebody sitting up there wanting your job. Well, and there's so many stories about the news media, I tell everybody, I felt like I had been working for the governor's office. I used to tell this all the time. 15 years before I knew I wasn't working for the press. But you know, they are a nice bunch of people. But they do some governors bad, and they'd get it in for them, and then there you'd be sitting out there like a sore thumb. And I always was trying to help them get the news, not the stories. I shall never forget the first time I ever saw Governor Wallace on television. I had known Governor Wallace since he was 15 years old, I think, when he came to the Capitol as a page. And he had grown into this office, but he had never been on national television that I knew of, and to me, I didn't see how he could make it. But he was on this issue of race. That's what they were talking about, of course. And when he went marching up there that day, this old Spivak come out, and he started off and he says, "Governor Wallace," and his Adam's apple went up and come down, and I thought, oh Lord, this is it. But the first question he asked him, he hit the trail running, and he never slowed down. He didn't slow up on a question they asked him. That was his first television appearance.
He had sort of the knack of knowing what he needed to say at the right time.
The Lord was good to him. I mean, really and truly. He blessed him with the word glib, I reckon. Is that what you want to say, a glib tongue? And he, you know, he would just take in this town during the times. I'd known him all that time when he was a little kid, you know. And he'd come up there with Governor Sparks and all those people I knew from Barber County. I didn't know at that time he was thinking about running for governor, but he never had any other thought. That's what he came up there for, I reckon, to learn. And that's when he was 15 years old now. That's when he first got to be a page. And then when he did get to be governor, he came to the front. He got all these people from Mississippi and all these people that knew how to write all of these race things. And he really could, he had some good stuff going.
How do you think, you may not want to say anything, but how do you think history will treat Governor Wallace as compared to Governor Folsom, as whichever one made the largest contribution to the state's progress?
Well, Governor, as I say, George Wallace has got a glib tongue, and he has known how, he's had a lot of people pushing him too and everything. But poor old Big Jim never did get, I don't think, all he was entitled to. Now, I think Big Jim was as good governor as we ever had. He started every program we got, and it every bit passed at some time or another. It wasn't on account of him. He couldn't get it through. But the federal government picked it up and put it on through. Because he and George Wallace were just like that to start with. George Wallace used to write his speeches. And then something came up, and they came to the parting of the ways. But he always followed Jim Folsom now. Don't ever think he didn't. He copied him and perfected him.
So you sort of look at Wallace as a student and Folsom as the teacher.
Yeah. What did they call it? What was it? College of Political Knowledge. That's right. He's a student of the College of Political Knowledge. That's what Jim Folsom used to call his school.